Number 1. The Oklo natural nuclear reactors. In 1972, a technician at the French uranium enrichment plant in Pierre-Latte ran a routine measurement on a shipment of ore from Gabon, West Africa. The uranium-235 concentration came back at 0.717%. It should have been 0.720. A discrepancy of 0.003%. On any other day, this would have been a rounding error. But uranium-235 does not vary. Its ratio is constant across every sample of natural uranium ever measured on Earth. Every meteorite, every moon rock, the number is always 0.720. Except this time, it wasn't. The investigation that followed would rewrite the history of nuclear physics. The ore had come from the Oklo mine in southeastern Gabon, a commercial uranium operation run by COMU-F since 1961. French physicist Francis Perrin led the analysis, and what his team found was, by any measure, impossible. Something had already consumed the uranium-235 before human beings mined it. The missing isotope hadn't decayed naturally. It had been split, fissioned. The signatures were unmistakable. Xenon isotope ratios trapped in aluminum phosphate minerals match fission products, not atmospheric xenon. Neodymium, zirconium, cerium, ruthenium, the chemical fingerprints of a sustained nuclear chain reaction, were embedded in the rock. 16 separate natural fission reactor zones were eventually identified across the Oklo and neighboring Oculobondo deposits. They had operated approximately 1.95 billion years ago during the Paleoproterozoic era, and they had run for several 100,000 years before shutting down. The physics is disarmingly simple. Today, uranium-235 makes up only 0.72% of all natural uranium. But 1.95 billion years ago, radioactive decay hadn't yet whittled it down. The concentration was 3.7%, above the 3% threshold needed for sustained fission. This is the same enrichment level used in modern pressurized water reactors. The fuel was already there. All it needed was a moderator to slow the neutrons, and groundwater percolating through the sandstone provided exactly that. The reactors operated in pulses. Fission heated the water until it boiled away, removing the moderator and halting the reaction. Water seeped back through the rock. The cycle restarted. 30 minutes on, 2.5 hours off. Alex Mashik and colleagues published the evidence for this pulsed cycle in Physical Review Letters in 2004, based on xenon gas analysis. Each reactor zone was modest, roughly 10 meters across, a few meters thick. Total output was approximately 100 kilowatts thermal, enough to run a few household kettles, but sustained over hundreds of thousands of years. What makes Oklo genuinely unsettling is not the fission itself, but the context. When these reactors were operating, the most complex life on Earth was single-celled. No animals, no plants, no multicellular organisms of any kind. The planet was already splitting atoms underground, while the surface was nothing but microbial mats and shallow seas, and the reactors only existed because of those microbes. The great oxygenation event driven by photosynthetic cyanobacteria roughly 2.4 billion years ago had filled the atmosphere with oxygen for the first time. That oxygen dissolved uranium from rocks, carried it in groundwater, and concentrated it in sedimentary deposits. Without cyanobacteria, Oklo could never have happened. Life made the fuel. Geology built the reactor. Water turned it on. Paul Kuroda, a geochemist at the University of Arkansas, had predicted the possibility of natural reactors in 1956, 16 years before Oklo was found. His paper, On the Nuclear Physical Stability of the Uranium Minerals, described the exact conditions. He just didn't know they'd already happened. The French Atomic Energy Commission initially classified the discovery. Cold War sensitivities around uranium enrichment made the finding politically inconvenient, but the science eventually escaped. And today, Oklo is cited by nuclear waste agencies around the world, including ANDRA in France and SKB in Sweden, as proof that geological disposal works. The fission products at Oklo migrated less than 10 meters in nearly 2 billion years. The waste stayed put. And somewhere in the universe, on any world with uranium-bearing geology and liquid water, the same thing could be happening right now. Number 2, the copper mummy of Chuquicamata. In 1899, miners working the Chuquicamata copper deposit in Chile's Atacama Desert broke into a collapsed tunnel roughly 3 meters below the surface. Inside, they found a human body. The skin had turned teal green. The hair was intact. The man was curled on his side in a crouch position, his stone hammer still clutched in one hand, a coiled llama hide rope beside him, woven grass sandals still on his feet. He had been killed by the mine. A tunnel collapse, probably sudden, sealed him in copper-rich rock, and the copper preserved him. Copper sulfate and copper chloride in the surrounding ore are bactericidal. They kill the microorganisms that cause decomposition. The ions cross-link proteins, stabilizing soft tissue the way formaldehyde stabilizes laboratory specimens. Under the microscope, copper crystals are visible within the dermal layers. The metal literally replaced biological tissue at the cellular level. It is the same chemical process that protects the surface of the Statue of Liberty. The patina that forms on bronze is a copper salt crust that prevents further corrosion. The miner's body became, in effect, a bronze artifact. The Atacama Desert compounded the effect. Some regions receive less than 1 millimeter of rainfall per year. The combination of copper chemistry and extreme aridity created a double preservation system, chemical fixation and desiccation working simultaneously. At least 3 other copper-preserved bodies have been found in Chilean mines, though none as complete as the Chuquicamata specimen. Dating the copper man has proven difficult. Radiocarbon analysis is complicated by copper contamination, which damages the carbon-14 signal. Estimates place him between roughly 550 AD and the pre-Inca period. DNA extraction attempts have faced the same problem. The copper that saved his body may have destroyed his genetic material. He was an Atacameño miner. His teeth showed heavy wear consistent with a maize-grinding diet. The tools found with him, the stone hammer hafted with leather bindings, the carrying basket, the rope, are consistent with pre-Columbian mining techniques that date back at least 2,000 years in the region. Atacameño miners used a technique called fire setting. They heated rock faces with fire, then doused the hot rock with water to crack the ore loose. In enclosed tunnels, this produces carbon monoxide. Many ancient miners likely died from the fumes long before collapses got them. The Chuquicamata deposit formed between 34 and 31 million years ago during the Eocene-Oligocene transition, when subduction of the Nazca Plate beneath South America created massive hydrothermal systems that concentrated copper in porphyry deposits. The mine contains an estimated 65 million tons of copper, one of the largest concentrations on Earth. Today it is the world's largest open-pit copper mine, operated by Codelco. 4.5 kilometers long, 3.5 kilometers wide, and over 1 kilometer deep. The original tunnel where the miner was found no longer exists. It was swallowed by the expanding pit decades ago. The Copper Man was eventually transferred to the American Museum of Natural History in New York, where he was displayed for years. The substance that killed him is the same substance that preserved him. And the mine that entombed him has now consumed the very spot where he was found. Number 3. The Tsodilo Hills Python Shrine Mine. In the Kalahari Desert of northwestern Botswana, a cluster of quartzite inselbergs rises 400 meters above the sand. The Tsodilo Hills contain over 4,500 rock paintings, the highest concentration per square kilometer of any site on Earth. The Sand People of the Kalahari call them the Mountains of the Gods. They believe the first spirit knelt at Tsodilo to pray after creation. In 2006, archaeologist Sheila Coulson of the University of Oslo entered Rhino Cave at the base of the hills and found something older than the paintings. A 6-meter natural rock formation had been deliberately modified, approximately 400 groove marks chipped into its surface to create the unmistakable impression of scales. It was a giant stone python. Someone had carved it. And the floor of the cave was buried in over 13,000 stone tool artifacts and specularite mining debris. Specularite is a crystalline form of hematite, iron ore, with a mirror-like metallic sheen. It sparkles. It was almost certainly mined for ritual body painting, cosmetics, and decoration of the dead. The artifacts date the mining activity to at least 40,000 years before present, making Tsodilo arguably the oldest known mining operation in human history, but the mining was not the point. The carved python was the point. In sand cosmology, the python is the creator being, the most powerful spiritual entity. Coulson found that finely crafted spear points, too delicate for any practical hunting purpose, had been burned in front of the python stone. Deliberately destroyed. These were offerings. And behind the python, a hidden chamber, accessible through a narrow shaft, would have allowed a person to speak and project their voice through the serpent's mouth, making the rock appear to talk. 40,000 years ago, in total darkness, lit only by animal fat flames, people descended into this mine not just to extract ore, but to worship. Isotopic analysis of the specularite shows it was chemically distinct from surface deposits. The miners specifically chose to excavate underground rather than collect freely available surface material. The ore from inside the earth may have carried spiritual significance that surface ore did not. Colorful stone tools made from non-local materials, chalcedony, jasper, were recovered from the cave floor, indicating long-distance exchange networks operating 40 millennia ago. Larry Barham of the University of Liverpool has argued that the specularite may have been functional rather than purely ritual. Body paint provides UV protection and insect repellents in the Kalahari. Coulson's response: functional explanations do not account for the deliberately destroyed weapons, the carefully carved serpent, or the speaking chamber. The discovery challenged a long-held assumption in archaeology that complex ritual behavior emerged in Europe with the Upper Paleolithic creative explosion around 40,000 years ago. Tsodilo suggests it was happening in Africa first, and possibly much earlier. Number 4. The Dragon Bone Apothecary Mines of China. For at least 2,000 years, traditional Chinese pharmacists have prescribed a substance called longgu, dragon bones. The Shenong Bencao Jing, compiled during the Han Dynasty, lists it as a sedative and treatment for anxiety, insomnia, and night sweats. The bones were ground into powder and mixed into herbal formulas. They were sold by weight in apothecary shops across China. The bones were not from dragons. They were fossils. Pleistocene megafauna, mammoth, rhinoceros, stegodon, giant hyena, dinosaur vertebrae, and critically, hominin remains. Homo erectus skulls ground to powder and swallowed. The pipeline was commercial. Farmers and miners dug fossils from caves, karst formations, and limestone quarries, then sold them to pharmacies. A 2009 study by Dong Wei of the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology estimated that Chinese pharmacies consumed approximately 500 tons of vertebrate fossils per year during the 20th century alone. The total over 2 millennia is incalculable. In 1899, Chinese scholar Wang Yirong made a discovery that should have ended the practice. He noticed that some dragon bones being sold in a Beijing pharmacy had inscriptions on them. They were not random scratches, they were characters. Shang Dynasty oracle bones, over 3,000 years old, the earliest known examples of Chinese writing. The pharmacists had been grinding China's written history into medicine along with its paleontological record. The oracle bone discovery led, eventually, to the most famous fossil site in China. In 1921, Swedish geologist Johan Gunnar Andersson was directed to a hill called Zhokudian near Beijing by local farmers who had been selling dragon bones from the site to pharmacies for years. Between 1929 and 1937, excavations there uncovered remains of approximately 40 Homo erectus individuals dating to between 400,000 and 700,000 years ago, along with evidence of fire use and stone tools. They were called Peking Man. The specimens were packed into 2 military footlockers in November 1941 for evacuation to the United States by a Marine detachment. The Japanese invasion intervened. The footlockers vanished. They have never been found. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong during the 1930s, German paleontologist Ralph von Königswald was systematically visiting Chinese pharmacies and purchasing dragon teeth from the shelves. Among them, he identified the teeth of Gigantopithecus, the largest primate that ever lived, standing 3 meters tall, known entirely from fossils that had been sitting in drugstores. The biggest ape in evolutionary history was first scientifically described from specimens that were about to be ground into powder. The irony is medicinal. Fossil bone is largely calcium phosphate. As a calcium supplement, dragon bone powder has genuine therapeutic value. The traditional prescription was accidentally correct about the chemistry. It was just catastrophically wrong about the source. Dragon bones remain listed in the 2020 edition of the Chinese Pharmacopoeia, though modern formulations increasingly substitute mineral calcium. In remote provinces, the fossil trade continues, and no one will ever know how many species, how many hominins, how many pages of evolutionary history were swallowed before anyone thought to check what they were eating. Number 5. The Messel Pit Death Lake. About 35 kilometers southeast of Frankfurt in the Hesse region of Germany, there is a hole in the ground that used to be an oil shale quarry. Workers extracted shale from it commercially between 1859 and 1971. They regularly encountered fossils in the rock. Most were discarded. Some were sold to private collectors. Nobody understood what the site actually was. The Messel Pit sits on the remains of a volcanic Mar Lake. A crater formed approximately 47.8 million years ago, when a gas eruption blew a hole in the landscape and groundwater filled it. The lake was small, roughly 300 meters across, steep-sided, and very deep. And it was a death trap. The water was stratified. The upper layers supported normal aquatic life. The bottom was permanently anoxic, no oxygen, no mixing. Periodically, volcanic CO2 seeped from vents beneath the lake bed and accumulated in the deep water. When conditions triggered an overturn, a sudden mixing of the layers, the dissolved CO2 was released in a limnic eruption. An invisible cloud of carbon dioxide, denser than air, rolled across the lake's surface and the surrounding shore. Every air-breathing animal in the vicinity suffocated. This is not a theoretical mechanism. In 1986, Lake Miocene, Cameroon, did exactly the same thing. 1,700 people died in minutes, along with every animal within a 25-kilometer radius. At Messel, this process repeated for approximately 1 million years. The bodies that sank into the anoxic deep water did not decompose. The fine-grained oil shale, deposited in annual layers called varves, encased them in a matrix so chemically hostile to bacteria that soft tissue was preserved in extraordinary detail. Over 10,000 specimens have been recovered since systematic scientific excavation began in the 1960s. A pregnant mare, Eurohippus messelensis, was found with her unborn foal still visible in the abdominal cavity. It is the oldest known evidence of mammalian reproductive biology in the fossil record. A snake was found with a lizard in its stomach, which itself had a beetle in its stomach. 3 levels of the food chain frozen in a single specimen. Beetles retain their structural coloration, iridescent greens and blues produced by physical nanostructures in the wing cases after 47 million years. Feather microstructures containing melanosomes have allowed paleontologists to reconstruct the original colors of Eocene birds. A pair of mating turtles were found locked together. They died during copulation and sank to the bottom, preserved in the act. In the 1970s, the Hessian state government announced plans to convert the exhausted quarry into a municipal garbage dump. A 20-year citizen protest and scientific lobbying campaign fought the decision. In 1995, UNESCO designated the Messel Pit a World Heritage Site, the first fossil site in Germany to receive the status. The Eocene record that was nearly buried under household waste is now considered one of the most important paleontological windows on Earth. Number 6. The Wieliczka salt mains trapped Miocene Sea. 13.6 million years ago, a shallow arm of the Prehistoric Sea, a vast inland ocean that once stretched from the Alps to Central Asia, was cut off by the rising Carpathian Mountains. Sealed from the global ocean, the trapped water evaporated. The dissolved salts precipitated and were buried. Today, that Dead Sea exists as the Wieliczka salt mine, 14 kilometers southeast of Krakow, Poland. The mine has been in continuous operation since the 13th century. It extends over 9 levels, reaches a maximum depth of 327 meters, and contains approximately 287 kilometers of tunnels. In 1978, UNESCO placed it on the first ever World Heritage List, one of the original 12 sites selected. The salt preserves time in ways that rock cannot. Fluid inclusions, microscopic pockets trapped inside halite crystals as they formed, contain actual Miocene seawater. Geochemists have cracked these crystals open and analyzed the liquid inside. Studies by Kovalovich and Galame found that the trapped water has significantly different ion ratios than modern seawater, higher magnesium to calcium, reflecting a fundamentally different ocean chemistry 13 million years ago. Gas analysis of the same inclusions measured Miocene atmospheric CO2 at approximately 300 to 500 parts per million. The world was warmer then, but the CO2 was only slightly higher than pre-industrial levels, a finding that complicates simple models of the relationship between greenhouse gases and a temperature. In 2000, Russell Vreeland and colleagues published a paper in Nature claiming they had revived halophilic microorganisms from Wieliczka salt crystals, bacteria that had been dormant in brine inclusions for 13 million years. If true, these would be the oldest viable organisms ever recovered. The claim remains fiercely contested. Critics, including Jack Griffith and colleagues, argue the organisms may be modern contaminants that infiltrated through microfractures. The debate is unresolved. At 135 meters depth, Lake Messel sits in darkness, an underground body of water saturated at 320 grams of salt per liter, so dense that objects float on its surface. 101 meters underground, the Chapel of St. Kinga is carved entirely from salt, walls, floor, altar, chandeliers, and religious scenes rendered in crystallized prehistoric sea. It took 67 years to complete. From 1895 to 1963, the mine's microclimate holds steady at 14 to 16 degrees Celsius year-round with 60 to 75% humidity, conditions stable enough that an underground sanatorium now treats asthma and allergy patients in the salt air. During World War II, the Nazis used the deepest levels as an underground armaments factory, forcing laborers to assemble aircraft components 135 meters below the surface. Gypsum crystals in the mine walls show annual growth bands that can be counted like tree rings. Individual evaporation episodes lasted 20 to 60,000 years. Clay interbeds between the salt layers contain Miocene microfossils, foraminiferae, diatoms, and plant pollen that record the transition from open marine conditions to hypersaline lagoon to dry salt flat. A sea dying in slow motion, one layer at a time, compressed into 327 meters of vertical space. Commercial salt mining ceased in 1996 due to flooding risks. Approximately 1.7 million visitors now descend into the mine each year. Over 7 centuries of extraction, roughly 7.5 million cubic meters of salt were removed, 20 billion kilograms of a prehistoric ocean brought to the surface and dissolved on human tongues. Number 7. The Grimes Graves, Neolithic Flint Mines. Near Thetford in the chalk downlands of Norfolk, the ground is pitted with over 430 depressions. The Anglo-Saxons who found them assumed they were the work of a god. Grim was a name for Woden, and graves meant diggings. They were half right about the scale. The depressions are the collapsed tops of Neolithic mine shafts, dug between approximately 3000 and 1900 BC. 37 hectares of industrial-scale flint extraction, 5,000 years old. The miners were after a specific layer. Upper Cretaceous chalk in this region contains 3 distinct bands of flint: topstone, wallstone, and floorstone. The floorstone, the deepest and highest quality, lay 6 to 14 meters below the surface. Reaching it required digging a vertical shaft through solid chalk, then excavating horizontal galleries outward along the flint seam, some extending 9 meters from the main shaft. The tools were red deer antler picks, over 300 have been recovered, and ox scapula shovels. The only light came from small chalk cup lamps filled with rendered animal fat. Residue analysis confirms the fuel was pig or cattle tallow. In these conditions, at the bottom of a 14-meter shaft in a horizontal tunnel lit by a single flickering flame, the miners extracted flint nodules by overhead striking with antler picks. Some of these galleries are 60 centimeters high. An adult cannot work in them. The evidence for children in the mines is circumstantial but persistent. Small handprints in chalk surfaces, child-sized antler tools, and tunnels too narrow for adult bodies to navigate. Experimental archaeology by John Lord demonstrated that a single shaft of average depth could be dug in roughly 20 to 25 person days using replica tools. The finished flint was napped on site, massive waste heaps of debridage surround the shafts, and distributed through exchange networks. Finished axes from Grimes graves have been found up to 100 kilometers away. In 1939, archaeologist A.L. Armstrong excavated Pit 15 and broke through into a sealed gallery that had never been reopened. The floorstone vein had thinned to nothing. The gallery was unproductive. But it was not empty. Arranged on the floor was a carved chalk figurine, roughly 10 centimeters tall, unmistakably depicting a pregnant woman. Beside it, a chalk phallus, a pile of flint nodules, and 7 deer antler picks laid out in a deliberate pattern. The gallery had been sealed intentionally. The interpretation that followed divided archaeologists for decades. Armstrong called it a fertility shrine, a ritual response to the mine going barren. In the 1970s and 80s, processual archaeologists led by Juliet Clutton-Brock dismissed this reading, arguing the objects were discarded tools and natural chalk formations. More recent reanalysis by Mark Edmonds of the University of York has largely restored the ritual interpretation. The arrangement was too deliberate. The gallery was too carefully sealed, and the context, a barren vein, a plea to the earth, makes emotional sense in a way that refused disposal does not. Number 8. The Sudbury Impact Crater Mines. 1.849 billion years ago, an asteroid approximately 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter struck what is now northern Ontario, Canada. The impact was comparable in scale to the Chicxulub event that ended the age of dinosaurs 66 million years ago. The fireball was visible from the moon, rock was ejected into orbit, impact ejectospherules have been found in sedimentary layers in Minnesota over 1,200 kilometers from the point of impact. The explosion created a crater estimated at 200 to 260 kilometers in diameter and generated a melt sheet 2.5 kilometers thick, the largest impact melt body known on Earth. As this ocean of molten rock cooled over thousands of years, gravity separated the minerals by density. Heavy sulfides, nickel, copper, and platinum group elements sank to the bottom and pooled in depressions in the crater floor. These pools solidified into the ore bodies that today sustain one of the world's most productive mining districts. The Sudbury Basin has been tectonically deformed since the impact. The Penokean orogeny, roughly 1.8 billion years ago, compressed the originally circular crater into an ellipse measuring 62 by 30 kilometers. From the surface, it is not obviously a crater. The basin presents as a broad depression surrounded by low hills, the remnant crater rim, eroded almost flat by nearly 2 billion years of weathering. The mines, Creighton, Coleman, McCready West, Copper Cliff, Garson, collectively produce approximately 200,000 tons of nickel and 200,000 tons of copper annually, roughly 10% of global nickel supply. The ore they extract is the asteroid. Not metaphorically, the nickel-copper sulfides were concentrated by the impact process itself, not by any conventional geological mechanism. Platinum group element analysis by Lightfoot and colleagues in 2017 confirmed the impactor was a chondritic stony asteroid. Every tunnel is carved through the solidified impact melt sheet. The walls of the mine display the Onaping Formation, a breccia containing fragments of the original target rock, impact glass, and accretionary lapilli formed from condensing impact vapor. Frozen rain from a rock storm. Creighton Mine has been in continuous operation since 1901. It reaches 2,500 meters below the surface. Temperatures at the bottom exceed 40 degrees Celsius, requiring massive refrigeration systems. 2 kilometers down in the same mine sits SNOLAB, a neutrino observatory that uses 1,000 tons of the heavy water to detect subatomic particles from the sun and distant supernovae, shielded from cosmic ray interference by 2 kilometers of impact rock. The economic value of metals extracted from the Sudbury structure over 120 years exceeds 300 billion Canadian dollars. When life on the surface was nothing but cyanobacteria and single-celled eukaryotes, an asteroid punched a wound in the crust that humans would mine for profit nearly 2 billion years later. Every working day, miners descend into that wound, extract space metal, and clock out. Number 9. The Riversleigh Limestone Quarry. In remote northwestern Queensland, about 250 kilometers from the Gulf of Carpentaria, a derelict limestone quarry sat largely forgotten for decades. Workers had blasted and extracted stone for construction and agricultural use. Fossils appeared regularly in the rock. Nobody paid them much attention. In 1963, geologist Richard Tedford of the American Museum of Natural History noted the fossils during a survey. But systematic excavation would not begin for another 13 years. When Michael Archer of the University of New South Wales finally started digging in 1976, he found Archer what had been hiding in the quarry walls, one of the richest mammalian fossil deposits ever discovered. Over 200 new species across at least 100 new genera have since been described from Riversleigh. The site spans approximately 25 million to 50,000 years ago, with peak diversity in the Miocene 15 to 25 million years before present. The preservation mechanism is unusually good. The fossils are encased in freshwater limestone, tufa, deposited by calcium carbonate-rich spring water, the mineral-saturated water-coated bones in a natural concrete that preserve them in three-dimensional detail. But the same toughness that preserved the fossils made them difficult to extract. Preparation requires dissolving the limestone matrix in dilute acetic acid, a process that takes weeks to months per specimen. The fauna is unlike anything alive in Australia today. Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion, weighed approximately 130 kilograms and possessed bolt cutter-like premolars that generated the strongest bite force relative to body size of any mammal ever measured, according to Stephen Rowe and colleagues in 2005. Bullicornis planae, nicknamed the demon duck of doom, was a flightless bird standing 2.5 meters tall and weighing 250 kilograms, with a massive beak that suggests carnivorous or omnivorous habits. Baru, a broad-snouted crocodilian 4 to 5 meters long, is interpreted as an ambush predator that lunged from the water's edge, a drop croc. One deposit yielded 26 individuals of Nimbodon lavericorum, a sheep-sized marsupial, including juveniles in what appear to be pouch positions. The interpretation: the cave floor collapsed, dropping an entire group to their deaths at once. It is one of the few cases in paleontology where a complete population structure of an extinct species can be reconstructed, from newborns to adults. Archer found blasted fossil fragments scattered across the quarry floor, remnants of specimens destroyed by decades of commercial extraction, before anyone recognized what the site contained. UNESCO co-listed Riversleigh with Nericorday Caves as a World Heritage Site in 1994. New deposits continue to surface. AL90, found in 2012, yielded the first known Australian Miocene eagle and evidence of pythons exceeding 6 meters. The deeper pattern is ecological collapse in slow motion. Riversleigh's bat diversity alone, at least 35 species, exceeds any modern Australian bat community, suggesting catastrophic species loss linked to the aridification that turned Miocene rainforest into the semi-arid scrub that covers the region today. Australia has been losing mammalian diversity for at least 15 million years. Riversleigh just shows us what was lost. Number 10. The Hallstatt Salt Mine. On the southwestern shore of Lake Hallstatt, in the Salzkammergut region of Upper Austria, a mountain has been mined for salt for 7,000 years, possibly longer. The earliest confirmed exploitation dates to the Middle Bronze Age, around 1500 BC, but there is evidence of Neolithic activity stretching back to approximately 5000 BC. The site is so culturally defining that the entire European Bronze to Iron Age transition period, roughly 800 to 450 BC, is named the Hallstatt culture, after what was found inside this mountain. Salt is a remarkable preservative. The Hallstatt mine has yielded organic artifacts that simply do not survive in normal archaeological contexts. A wooden staircase dating to approximately 1344 BC, dendrochronologically dated to within 3 years, was discovered in the mine's Kernverwässerungswerk tunnel in 2003. It is 8 meters long, 1.2 meters wide, constructed from spruce logs with mortise and tenon joints. The oldest known wooden staircase in Europe. The carpentry demonstrates a level of Bronze Age engineering that requires rethinking assumptions about technological sophistication 3,300 years ago. The salt preserved everything the miners left behind: leather backpacks called kraxen, woven textile fragments, fur caps, wooden tool handles, coiled ropes, beeswax-coated wooden torches. Food remains including cherry pips, grape seeds, sloe berries, barley, millet, spelt, and animal bones from pork and beef. In 1734, the body of a prehistoric miner was found deep in the mine, preserved by salt, and recorded by the mine's overseer, Johann Georg Ramsauer. The body was reburied without scientific study. We will never know what it could have told us. Ramsauer later conducted extensive excavations of the cemetery above the mine between 1846 and 1863, uncovering over 1,000 graves containing weapons, pottery, jewelry, and textiles. The grave goods told a story of staggering wealth: imported amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa, bronze vessels from Italy, glass beads from the eastern Mediterranean. Salt had made Hallstatt one of the richest communities in prehistoric Europe. In 2021, a study led by Kirsten Kowarek of the Natural History Museum in Vienna analyzed a preserved fecal sample, a coprolite, from an Iron Age miner working in the Hallstatt galleries. The results: the miner's diet included blue cheese and beer. DNA analysis identified Penicillium roqueforti, the mold used to make Roquefort-style cheese, and Saccharomyces cerevisiae, brewer's yeast. It is the oldest confirmed evidence of deliberate fermentation for food production, probiotic technology, 2,700 years old, preserved in a miner's gut. Around 1245 BC, a catastrophic mudslide triggered by water infiltration destroyed the Bronze Age mining operation. The collapse sealed entire work areas, preserving tools in their working positions and wooden infrastructure that would otherwise have been continuously recycled. After the disaster, mining resumed in a different area of the mountain, creating adjacent but separate tunnel systems, one Bronze Age, one Iron Age, that document the technological transition from bronze picks to iron tools in a single geological cross-section. The deeper resonance of Hallstatt is continuity. 7,000 years of humans entering the same mountain, Bronze Age miners descending with antler picks, Iron Age miners descending with iron tools, medieval miners descending with carts, modern tourists descending with audio guides. The impulse is identical. The mountain has salt. Humans need salt. The transaction has not changed in 70 centuries. There is a reason these discoveries were made underground and not on the surface. Mines are vertical cuts through time. Every meter of rock that a drill or a pick passes through represents thousands, sometimes millions of years of accumulated history. Surface geology is subject to erosion, weathering, glaciation, human development, forces that scrub the record clean. But underground, sealed from oxygen and water and light, the record survives. Salt preserves organic material that would decompose in months above ground. Copper fixes soft tissue at the molecular level. Anoxic lake sediment traps color, fur, and stomach contents for 47 million years. Impact melt entombs the chemistry of an asteroid that vaporized on contact. The things that survive underground survive precisely because they were buried and because no one disturbed them until the mine broke through. The mineral-rich zones that miners target often coincide with catastrophic events. The Sudbury ore body exists because an asteroid impact melted the crust and concentrated metals in the crater floor. The Wieliczka salt exists because an entire sea was sealed off and evaporated. The Messel oil shale exists because a volcanic explosion created a death trap that operated for 1 million years. The Oklo uranium concentrated because cyanobacteria oxygenated the atmosphere 2.5 billion years ago, dissolving uranium from surface rocks and depositing it underground. In each case, the economic resource and the prehistoric horror are the same thing. The catastrophe created the deposit. The deposit attracted the miners. The miners found the evidence of the catastrophe. It is a closed loop. And yet what did survive is extraordinary. We know what a 47-million-year-old horse ate for its last meal. We know that Iron Age miners in Austria consumed blue cheese and beer. We know that natural nuclear reactors pulsed on and off in 30-minute cycles nearly 2 billion years ago. We know that 40,000 years ago, in total darkness, people carved a stone python and burned their finest weapons in front of it. We know that a man died in a Chilean copper mine, and the metal that killed him replaced his cells one by one until he became, in effect, a statue of himself. These are not abstractions. They are physical objects in physical places, preserved by chemistry and pressure and darkness, waiting in the rock until someone broke through. Every mine in this video began the same way. Someone dug into the earth looking for something useful and found something they did not expect. Natural nuclear reactors running for hundreds of thousands of years in Gabon, a man mummified by the metal he was mining in Chile, a 40,000-year-old python shrine in Botswana, millions of fossils ground into medicine in China, an invisible death trap in Germany, a prehistoric sea compressed into salt in Poland, goddess figures carved in the darkness of chalk tunnels in England, an asteroid wound turned into a nickel mine in Canada, a quarry full of carnivorous kangaroos in Australia, and a mountain that has been mined continuously since the Neolithic. The Earth keeps things. It keeps them in salt, in copper, in anoxic mud, in impact melt, in hallite crystals, in oil shale varves. It keeps bones, and air bubbles, and fission products, and mating turtles, and unborn foals, and 3,000-year-old cheese. It keeps them in the dark, under pressure, sealed away from oxygen and time and human curiosity, until someone digs where they are not supposed to dig. The common thread is not horror, it is depth. Not just physical depth, though some of these mines reach 2.5 kilometers below the surface. Temporal depth. The Oklo reactors operated for longer than all of human civilization. The Wieliczka salt was ocean when the ancestor of every great ape alive today had not yet evolved. The Messel death lake killed for 1 million years, and nobody noticed because nobody existed to notice. Mines are the only places where human beings voluntarily enter deep time. The surface of the Earth is a thin membrane of the present, grass, concrete, weather, the last few thousand years. But every meter downward is another page backward. At Sudbury, the tunnel walls are 1.85 billion years old. At Hallstatt, the salt on your tongue is 13 million years old. At Oklo, the spent nuclear fuel is older than multicellular life, and the miners who descend into these places every day do not think about it. They clock in. They ride the cage down. They extract copper, nickel, salt, flint, uranium, limestone. They clock out. Beneath their feet, the earth holds its records, patient, compressed, dark, waiting for the next person who digs where they were not supposed to dig.